Good afternoon. Welcome to the afternoon session of the Inauguration Debate Series. I'm John Franklin, Director of Partnerships and International Programs for the National Museum of African American History and Culture, and we're pleased to co-sponsor this debate with our host institution, the National Museum of Natural History. The National Museum of African American History and Culture will break ground next to the Washington Monument in 2012. We will open our doors in 2015. But we're not waiting to have a building to begin programs and exhibitions, programs like the one today, programs like the one we will be holding this summer called Giving Voice, the Power of Words in African American Culture. One of our first partnerships was with the National Museum's Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage, which produces the annual Folklife Festival on the Mall. We have 1 million visitors over a 10-day period. After the storm Katrina, we held a series of concerts so people could understand the range of African American musical expressions out of New Orleans and the culture that was endangered by that storm. In 2007, we held a program looking at the roots of Virginia culture, Native, British, and African American, and looked at the very close links musically, agriculturally, between Africa and Virginia. This year, in addition to an exhibition on 1968 that's in the quad below African art and the Sackler, we have an exhibition that will open next week looking at images of Washington, D.C. through the lens of the Scurlock Studio, the African American photography family that documented Black Washington in the 20th century. And we will have programs such as this, programs to help you learn how to protect what you have in your home, the documents you have in your home, the artifacts that you have in your home. And we will very soon announce who will be competing in the architecture competition for our museum. Over 20 firms brought their qualifications to us. We've narrowed it down to a field of 8, and they will be further narrowed down to 5 or 6, and they will be announced in the next month. They'll have 180 days to develop models for this new museum. And those models will be on view in the castle for all the public to see and for you to come and assess. So we're an institution in the process of becoming, and we will need your support, financial and otherwise, to make that happen. It's a $500 million project. Half is to come from Congress, half is to come from the private sector. So we need absolutely every person's support and letters to your members of Congress for the financial support that must come from Congress. Now, words and oral expressions are very important in the African American community. They're important in all cultures. But particularly in this society where African Americans came against their will and under many prescriptions of not being allowed to read and write, being illegal to learn to read and write, punishable offense, oral expressions became even more important in this society. And we came from all different parts of Africa to different parts of the New World. And we had to learn to communicate in English, in French, in Dutch, in Spanish, in Portuguese. These were very challenging circumstances. Now, we're very pleased that many helped us along the way. Parents who were unlettered raised the money and built the schools in rural and urban areas. And missionary and state institutions were built to educate our youth beyond the secondary level. Those schools began after the Civil War, to most extent, to great extent. And we have the legacy of those institutions in the historically black colleges and universities across our nation today. I was just asking my father, who was a debater, he's 94, if indeed his father, class of Morehouse 1903, was a debater. And we're not able to ascertain whether he was a debater or not. He became an attorney, and he couldn't go to the University of Oklahoma, where his parents had paid taxes since the 1830s, because no African Americans were admitted to that institution. And that's the only institution that taught law in the Oklahoma Territory, Indian Territory. So he studied law by correspondence. He took the bar in 1908. So you see, we've gone through different challenges than the rest of America has to be educated. Now, in 1908, we have the first recorded debate between historically black colleges and universities. And this event today is partially inspired by that centennial. For nearly 30 years before the first debate between black and white universities took place, HBCUs like Howard hosted or traveled to competitions against other HBCUs like Shaw, Lincoln, Wiley. They became famous again through the film The Great Debaters. Wilberforce, Morehouse, Fisk, Atlanta, and Virginia Union. Universities at least twice a year met on subjects such as women's suffrage, the income tax, limitation on property, inheritance, a graduated income tax, the government ownership of the telegraph, Japanese exclusion, compulsory arbitration, compulsory military training, the government ownership of railroads, and the breaking of the allegiance to the Republican Party. The National Museum of African American History and Culture is particularly proud that these two HBCUs, Fayetteville State and Vorhees College, have decided to revive debate on their campuses and were selected to participate in this debate, this third debate today. I hope many of you were here this morning to hear the different and very well prepared debaters. How many of you were here this morning? Wasn't it an exciting set of debates? And I'm so glad you came back this afternoon for the third and final debate on foreign policy. Historically black colleges and universities are very important to our new National Museum of African American History and Culture for a number of reasons. We are interested in chronicling in the museum the history of education of African Americans. And to do so, we must tell the story of African American colleges and universities and the struggle by our parents and children and great-great-great-grandparents for education. And the story of these institutions is part of that story, which we must tell. We also want to make sure that students in these universities know that cultural institutions and museums are potential careers after they finish their undergraduate and graduate education. So we need to develop a set of fellowships and internships with institutions, historically black colleges and others, to bring students to the awareness of the potential of the museum world as careers. And thirdly, this is something I've just thought up in the last couple of weeks. We're in the process of doing oral histories, intergenerational oral histories with an organization called StoryCorps. And over the past year, we collected 1,860 intergenerational interviews of African Americans, the East Coast, Midwest, the West, and the South. And it seems to me that we could benefit from having students in colleges interview the faculty and staff of historically black colleges as a part of a new phase of StoryCorps. And what better time to do that than at homecoming, when there are all the generations of these schools present, and the students could interview people who graduated from their school in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, right up to the present. And I think we could have a wonderful collection of memories through such an undertaking. And so I haven't briefed my colleague on this idea, but please join me in welcoming Dr. Leonard Haynes, who's Executive Director of the White House Initiative on Historically Black Colleges and Universities, part of the Department of Education, who will introduce this third debate.
Thank you very much, John Franklin. He's very distinguished progeny of his father, John Hope Franklin, but John himself is also distinguished. And so we're just delighted to be able to be brought to the podium by him and appreciate his stewardship here at the Smithsonian. And he's just, as you just heard, given me another duty, and I like what he said, and I think we'll be able to follow up on it. Well, ladies and gentlemen, let me also welcome you to the inaugural debate series that was launched this morning. I need not tell you that this is a very historical moment in the history of the United States of America. We are celebrating the anniversary of Martin Luther King's birthday, which in and of itself is also historic. I'm reminded yesterday by one of my cousins, my mother, who's a native of Atlanta, was actually being dated by Dr. King at one time. Mother called him ML, and she said, "I don't think he'll amount to very much." She was not right. But anyway, my mother's family knew the King family very well. And of course, we're on the eve of perhaps the greatest event in modern United States history, the swearing in of the first African-American president of the United States of America, which is in some ways almost incomprehensible, but in many other ways it is comprehensible because this is a country that recognizes freedom and opportunity and justice, and finally we are living up to the promise of those tremendous statements made by the founders of this great country. The Great Debaters, of course, film that came out last year was very, very popular, which celebrated the debate tradition that was at Wiley College in Marshall, Texas, for those of you who don't know where it's located, was just outstanding in terms of a film presentation. Directed by Denzel Washington and supported in part, a large measure, by Oprah Winfrey. It celebrated the academic achievements that take place in the historically black college community, one that was long forgotten by the United States of America. There's a tendency in this country to think of black history, if you will, in segments. First there was slavery, then there was emancipation, and nothing happened until the Civil Rights Movement, and now here. But this demonstrated a lot was going on all along, and we just didn't take the time to know about it. So we certainly celebrate this movie. But it was out of that film that John Davis, along with Jeff Porro, who did the screenplay for the film, and Tim O'Donnell at Mary Washington College, came to my office and talked about the need to revitalize the debate tradition in the historically black college community. And I said, this is a great idea and we need to do it. Now, for those of you who don't know, we have 105 historically black colleges and universities in the United States of America. They're located in 20 states. They're located in 20 states, with 11 of them in North Carolina, which has the largest number, and they range from the state of Michigan all the way to Florida, all the way to Oklahoma. This initiative office that I'm responsible for began under the administration of Jimmy Carter. Every president of the United States since Jimmy Carter has signed an executive order which, in effect, directs the agencies of the federal government to increase and expand the participation of the historically black colleges in the programs of the federal government, because we pay taxes too, and we've never received the full benefit. And you don't have to be a rocket science to go on the campus of Vorhees and Fayetteville, then go to Clemson and the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill to see that something's not quite right. And we've been in this country as long, if not longer, and we've yet to receive the full benefit. So that's why this order is here. And the incoming president, we fully expect there's no reason for him not to sign another executive order, and he's already indicated his support for the black colleges. The current order calls for us to increase our participation with the private sector and to form partnerships with entities like the Smithsonian Institution. And we are, of course, making tremendous progress, and through the efforts of John Franklin, we've made major strides. So having this inaugural debate series, we feel, is an appropriate expression on the eve of the swearing in of Mr. Barack Obama to celebrate academic purposes of institutions and to involve the HBCUs. So if you look at the menu of items that are going around in the papers about where you can go in this inaugural weekend, believe it or not, this is probably one of the few that has an academic purpose attached to it. Everything else is entertainment. There's no entertainer that's going to try to bogart their way onto this stage and debate anybody. They are not trained. So we've reached the attention of the media on this, and so we're delighted to have you here today to cause you to pause and think, because the issues that these debate teams are discussing are the very issues that the incoming president will be laboring over on a regular basis. And this gives the young people, who we must celebrate, the encouragement to keep it up, to press on, and because it's the next generation, as you know, that's going to take our places when we step away. So with that as just sort of a backdrop, let me just say that we are just delighted to be part of this effort and to have these two great institutions, one from North Carolina, Fayetteville, which is near Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and then those of you who don't know about Vorhees, is in Denmark, South Carolina, a thriving metropolis, a great academic institution whose president is here today. Dr. Sellers, please stand up, the president of Vorhees College. So we're going to hear from these debate teams that we are reviving. This, we hope, will be a springboard for other historical black colleges to re-engage with the debate society. We're working with Debate Solutions to try to cause this movement to grow, and we think this is the direction we want to go. And so having this, again, on this inaugural historic week is very, very important to us. So again, thank you so much for coming out to a free event, I might add. And let's listen to the young people as they go through their paces. And please give them your warm round of applause as they come to the podium. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. My name is Timothy O'Donnell, and I'm the Director of Debate at the University of Mary Washington. And it is my great pleasure to introduce today's debate. If debate is the so-called quintessential American art form, engagement in civil argument represents the essence of the American experience. Although formal intercollegiate debating activities can be traced to the 19th century literary societies and even before, the turn of the century marked a renaissance of debate at many of the nation's colleges, including small schools from small towns like Marshall, Texas, Fredericksburg, Virginia, and in a little town 20 miles north of Raleigh, North Carolina, called Wake Forest, as well as soon-to-be large schools at the nation's burgeoning land-grant institutions like Michigan State, and prestigious and storied institutions such as the University of Southern California. While the call of the Second World War forced a period of hibernation in intercollegiate debate, it would soon return stronger than ever after the Allied victory, and was led by none other than the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, which in 1947 hosted the first annual national championship tournament, a tournament which is now called the National Debate Tournament. This March, 64 years after that competition, the nation's best and brightest will travel to the University of Texas at Austin to crown the 63rd National Debate Tournament champion. The alumni of intercollegiate debate built up over these many years are many and represent a vast network of unlimited possibility. Now, let me say something about the film The Great Debaters, because in many ways it was a film about debaters, but it was also a film about coaches. We need great coaches, and we have some here today. Ross Smith from Wake Forest, William Repko and Greta Stahl from Michigan State, Adrian Bravero from the University of Mary Washington, and Gordon Stables from the University of Southern California. But we have two new members of the intercollegiate debate community that we welcome, and I'd like to recognize them now. Gordon English from Vorhees College, and William Greg Thomas from Fayetteville State University. Welcome to intercollegiate debate and the coaching profession, and we look forward to working with you in the next several years. At this time, I'd like to talk a little bit about the debaters and the two teams who are heir to the long tradition of intercollegiate debate at the nation's HBCUs, which we've heard many things about today. But before introducing these wonderful students who I've had the privilege of working with over the past 2 days in Fredericksburg, I'd like to thank their institutions, because their institutions made a momentous and important and historic decision, and that was to place the virtues of a debate education as central to the academic mission of their university. That's extremely important, and we thank you, and we want to honor that commitment, and we look forward to meeting your universities in competition. And so, without further ado, let me introduce today's great debaters. On the affirmative, from Fayetteville State University in Fayetteville, North Carolina, we welcome Queen Elizabeth Colbert, a sophomore from Charlotte, North Carolina, who is majoring in sociology with a minor in English. Queen is a hard-working, and I can attest to that, a hard-working student who has been on the dean's list and is active in many activities, including student government, where she serves as a senator at large. The youngest of 7 siblings, she plans to become an attorney. We've heard a lot of that today. Queen's partner is Jessica Jansipar-Ross, a senior from Tucson, Arizona, who is majoring in speech. Jessica is a dedicated student who is on the chancellor's list. She is a member of the National Society of College Scholars and a second-degree black belt in Taekwondo. Jessica's primary area of interest is public advocacy, and she has interned with Partnership for Children and is currently a professional tutor with the Gear Up program. Jessica, too, plans to go to law school. Now on the negative, from Vorhees College in Denmark, South Carolina, Victorita Pan. Victorita is a senior from Bucharest, Romania, who is majoring in accounting. During her academic career at Vorhees College, Ms. Pan received the coveted PricewaterhouseCoopers Leadership Scholarship as the Atlanta Monster Diversity Leadership Program. Upon graduation, she plans to attend graduate school in the pursuit of a specialized Master's of Business Administration in Accounting and Marketing. Ultimately, she plans to become a certified public accountant. Finally, Mr. Cameron Towns, who's a first-year student and native of Greenville, South Carolina, who plans to major in mass communication. He has experienced success in debating, most recently as a state finalist in Lincoln Douglas Debate State Championships as a high school student in South Carolina. He is interested in becoming a broadcast news analyst, and his dream is to work for ESPN. Mr. Towns is also the president of the first-year class at Vorhees College, and we can expect that he will be an active recruiter to the university's debate program. Today's debate, the format. Today's exhibition features two teams who are representing arguments of opposing sides in one of our most compelling and, dare I say, important foreign policy controversies, the virtues of the so-called Bush Doctrine. Utilizing a format unlike what you've seen in the presidential debates, but closely resembling what happens in intercollegiate debate competition, the debate teams will exhibit each of the three primary elements of a debate: expository argument, cross-examination, in which each debater asks and answers questions, and refutation. Today's debate features opening speeches from all four debaters, as well as cross-examination and one closing statement from each side. Please join me in welcoming Vorhees College and Fayetteville State to intercollegiate debate.
Fayetteville State University would like to thank the Smithsonian, and those individuals involved in this great program. Let's go back in time. It's 1962. The threat of nuclear war is looming. The United States is looking for allies. So we send Secretary of State Dean Acheson to France. After briefing their president on our present situation, we are hopeful for his support in the case of nuclear war against Russia. Before President de Gaulle could answer, Acheson offered to show evidence of Soviet missiles armed with nuclear warheads. The president's response: "I do not wish to see these photographs. The word of the President of the United States is good enough for me. Please tell him France stands with America." Since the invasion of Iraq failed to prove that weapons of mass destruction existed, the initial rationale for the war fell with it. Can anyone honestly believe that our allies would have the same response as President de Gaulle did? Probably not, even with physical proof. This is why Fayetteville State University stands resolved that President-elect Obama should abandon the Bush Doctrine. Today we're going to examine what the Bush Doctrine is, the principles of the doctrine, and the negative effects of those principles both domestically and internationally. The Bush Doctrine came into play after the attacks on September the 11th, 2001, and has evolved in the time since the beginning of the war. The Bush Doctrine currently has two principles, which are laid out in the 2006 National Security Strategy. Those principles are the right of the U.S. to engage in preemptive war, which we did in Iraq, and the duty to promote democracy on a global scale to eliminate tyranny. Unfortunately, we have seen these principles have had significant negative effects here at home and overseas. Domestically, the Bush Doctrine has had negatively affected the U.S. economy, military, and popular opinion of the president. Over the course of the war, America has spent over $6 billion a month in Iraq. And according to Nobel Prize winner Joseph E. Stiglitz, the cost of the war will likely exceed $3 trillion. When you consider that approximately 8 million homes that will go into foreclosure over the next 4 years, I'm sure those families could find better use of that money right about now. In addition to our economy, our soldiers have also suffered as a result of the doctrine. Since the beginning of the Iraq War in 2003, 4,213 U.S. service members, including 11 civilians working for the Defense Department, have been killed in Iraq. Additionally, there have been 115 suicides, 935 attempted suicides among service members since the beginning of the war. And with other issues like brain injuries and post-traumatic stress disorder, the full effects of this war may be unknown. Now that we have estimated the negative effects of the Bush Doctrine within the home front, we will examine the losses of lives, the U.S. credibility, and the unpopularity of the Bush Doctrine worldwide. Iraq has suffered as many, if not more, losses than we have. Fayetteville State University cannot quite give you a concrete number of Iraqi deaths because the Bush administration conveniently stopped keeping track in 2005. Maybe President Bush felt if we didn't know the number of casualties, then maybe he wouldn't feel as bad for his stand in the war. However, one consecutive study estimates that between 2003 through 2006, 151,000 Iraqis were killed. Those numbers included women, children, and elderly, and many more people who are innocent victims in this conflict. We lost our credibility. Iran, North Korea, and Syria pose real threats to the international community. Yet preemptive action in Iraq has made it difficult for future U.S. leaders to gain support to deal with these problems. Iran, North Korea, and Syria have pursued the production of nuclear warheads. Iran has enriched uranium since 2005 and refuses to allow inspections of their program. North Korea in 2006 set off small nuclear devices with which China, who is North Korea's greatest supporter, condemned. The Bush Doctrine reduces credibility internationally. According to Research Center report, the mistrust of the U.S. and Europe is the highest it has ever been. In 2008, a Gallup poll concluded 75% of Egyptians did not believe the U.S. is serious about democratic change in the Middle East. This lack of international support has led to the United States being less able to secure our national strategy. President Obama could choose from many different ways to handle foreign issues, but his first and foremost step should be to abandon the doctrine, and he will. Even the Bush administration is turning away from the Bush Doctrine of preemptive action. Instead of attacking Syria, Iran, or North Korea, the Bush administration has had to move to the uses of sanctions. President-elect Obama has said in a variety of statements he believes in violence against imminent threats. Furthermore, President-elect Obama does not support the use of a doctrine because different situations call for different actions. The Bush Doctrine has had several devastating effects on our nation. Hopefully, after following through on the promise of change, by discarding the Bush Doctrine, President-elect Obama can regain the trust of the international community and make the word of the president good enough again. Thank you.
Is it your contention tonight in this debate that President Obama should not live up to the oath that he is about to take on tomorrow?
He is supposed to live up to his responsibilities as president, so yes.
How do you suggest he does so in the light of the new threat of terrorism?
President-elect Obama's responsibilities as president is to preserve, protect, and uphold the Constitution.
Isn't the Constitution the voice of the people, and therefore it is also responsible for providing for the livelihood of the people whose voices it represents?
True, but the Congress give the president power to go forth with those threats.
Under the oath that President-elect Barack Obama will take on tomorrow, the responsibility bestowed upon him has more to do with protecting the national security of his people. Once again, how do you suggest he does that in light of the new threat of terrorism?
I will redirect that to my partner. She speaks more about that in her part of the speech.
We believe that President-elect Barack Obama will follow the strategy that Secretary of State-elect Hillary Clinton laid out last week, that we should use diplomacy, economic sanctions, and also military action, all of our different tools, applying each one to the appropriate situation.
We saw what happened when we delayed a strike against a possible threat, example being Pearl Harbor. Is your position that the United States should risk the lives of more citizens by waiting before we strike?
If there is imminent threat, the president should take action, but only if there is concrete evidence and we exhausted all of our resources.
So, my question to you is, so should President-elect Barack Obama put a price tag on your freedom or safety?
Yes, and the reason for that is I believe that my leader should first and foremost make sure that he looks at the consequences of the war and the cost of the war before entering into the war.
What about his responsibility for the security of your life?
I'm sorry, we are out of time. But thank you for that great question, though.
Before I begin, first, I would like to say that Vorhees College would like to say thank you to the Inauguration Debate Series for giving us this opportunity, and thank you to the Smithsonian as well. Now to the topic at hand. You know, 7 years ago, American citizens boarded a plane to die. 7 years ago, American citizens boarded a plane to die. 7 years ago, American citizens boarded a plane to die. It has been 7 years since 19 Islamic terrorists affiliated with Al-Qaeda hijacked 4 commercial passenger jet airliners. The hijackers intentionally crashed 2 of the airliners into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York City. On that day, the dreams of peace and stability in this nation was transformed into nightmares of despair and misery. One of our symbols of freedom and one of our proud structures of liberty now laid at our feet in ruins. Each and every one of you who calls yourself American citizens, each and every one of you who calls yourself American citizens of this great nation looked at the twisted metal and the burning rubble of the World Trade Center and the chest cavity of your mind inhaled the horrible stench of uncertainty and fear. This fear caused by the toxic fumes of carnage and death that took place on 9/11, All we wanted to know was where was our security when we needed it the most. We knew that we had the strongest military power in the world. We knew that we had the strongest defense systems. So where was this power when we needed it the most? President George W. Bush asked himself that same question, and for 7 years, he has answered that question of our safety with a new group of security policies called the Bush Doctrine. Even though for 7 years, this doctrine has been providing a cloak of protection for our nation, the biggest question that sits on the realms of your mind today is whether we should keep this doctrine as we enter the presidential term of Barack Obama. Today, Fayetteville State University will argue that we should abandon this doctrine because of its ideologies and concepts. But today, Vorhees College will argue that any form of security policy that can prevent terrorists from using our own resources against us is still needed. Policies that have transformed our nation, have transformed our national security institutions to constantly strive to meet the challenges of the century is still needed. And policies that seek to spread the option of freedom is still needed. After 9/11, the aftermath of this catastrophe showed us that our security needed to be heavily renovated. These terrorist attacks instilled into the U.S. an immense fear and realization that America was no longer protected by oceans. These terrorists showed the U.S. that they faced a great threat of annihilation, not from a nation state, but from a group of terrorists called Al-Qaeda. The twisted beliefs that these terrorists live by causes them to use an aggressive behavior to attain what they want through the idea of death and fear. The twisted beliefs of these terrorists causes them to use the twisted beliefs that these terrorists live by would give them the idea to strike any opponent by the presence of fear. And they have been trying to strike this presence of fear on the U.S. since the late 20th century. Ladies and gentlemen, 9/11 was not the first time that Al-Qaeda has attacked America and its allies. Because did we forget that on February 26, 1993, a car bomb was detonated below Tower 1 of the World Trade Center, injuring hundreds of American citizens? Did we also forget that on August 7, 1998, there was a car bomb explosions in the U.S. Embassy, East African capital cities of Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, and Nairobi, Kenya? And did we also forget that on October 12, 2000, Al-Qaeda militants bombed the U.S. missile destroyer USS Cole, killing 17 U.S. servicemen in a suicide attack and damaging the vessel while lay offshore? And did we forget that finally on September 11, 2001, it took the deaths of 3,000 people to perish at the World Trade Center for the U.S. to finally realize that the previous attacks were pieces of a war strategy created by Al-Qaeda to inflict any possible harm on our nation? Finally, on September 27, 2001, President Bush answered these terrorist attacks by delivering a speech to the joint session of Congress, saying, and I quote, "We will direct every resource at our command, every means of diplomacy, every tool of intelligence, every instrument of law enforcement, and every financial influence to the destruction and to the defeat of the global terror network. We will starve them of funding. We will turn them one against another. We will drive them from place to place until there's no refuge or no rest. We will even pursue nations who provide aid or safe haven for terrorist networks. Every region and every nation now has a decision to make. Either you're with us or you're with the terrorist." I will not stand here and mislead you to think that the Bush Doctrine did not steer our national and foreign security policies down a very aggressive path. But after 9/11, President Bush made a promise to strengthen our security by using the aggressive policies of the Bush Doctrine. Ladies and gentlemen, this path of having a stronger defense system did not come by a magical rainbow or some pixie dust. This stronger defense system came by the principles of preemptive strike and the promotion of democracy. One of the most important reasons why President-elect Barack Obama should not abandon this doctrine is because the principles of the Bush Doctrine have already created the necessary tools and strategies to protect our country from terrorists. I see that I'm running out of time, so I'm going to let my partner elaborate on the next 2 points, but I would like to say something. Ladies and gentlemen, there were two main objectives was set out by the Bush Doctrine, and each objective over the span of 8 years have been reached. We question the security of our nation after 9/11. And for 7 years, the Bush Doctrine has answered that question by providing stronger security standards through the intelligence agencies and defense departments. Ladies and gentlemen, we cannot go back to the horrible memories and events of 9/11, but we can continue to use the Bush Doctrine to protect our homeland from any possible threat. The terrorists the enemy that we still face will continue to direct every resource at their command to destroy democracy or any other belief that goes against their own. They will use any instruments and any financial influence to gain every necessary weapon of war to the destruction and to the defeat of America and its allies. On a day in which Martin Luther King Jr. is recognized as one of our nation's greatest civil rights leaders, I would be remiss if I did not bring forth a piece of black history in this debate. Imagine this, ladies and gentlemen. If the people of West African civilizations had the necessary tools to prevent the corrupt ideologies of European slave traders, do you think they wouldn't have used them? If they could combine all their resources to combat the corrupt philosophies of slave traders, if they could have stopped the deaths of innocent men and women, if they could have stopped the oppression of an entire culture, do you think they would have done so? This is an example of what may happen if we take the reactive approach rather than taking the proactive approach. West Africa faced their own version of terrorism. Doesn't this analogy possess striking similarities to the possibility of America being overtaken by terrorists without the Bush Doctrine? Thank you.
Have there been any terrorist attacks on U.S. soil since 9/11?
There have not been any major successful terrorist attacks on U.S. soil since 9/11.
Okay. Can you explain how the Bush Doctrine was directly responsible for the prevention of recent threats or attacks?
Well, the answer to that question, that there is 5 basic principles to the Bush Doctrine. And to answer that question, the first principle is easy. It's preemptive strike. We are responsible for preventing these terrorist attacks, preemptive strike, which means the assumption that the enemy is going to plan an attack, which means I'm going to stop your attack before you attack me.
Okay. If we remove the Bush Doctrine, will the Homeland Security Department be dismantled?
Ask that again.
If we remove the Bush Doctrine, will the Homeland Security Department be dismantled?
No, the Homeland Security yes, my fault. Yes, the Homeland Security will be dismantled because the Bush Doctrine has created tools and they have strengthened our Homeland Security Act. And then it goes back to this. Have we been attacked? If you don't want me to answer this question, I can have a seat.
No, go ahead.
But have we been attacked since 9/11? No, we have not. Thank you.
Okay. So are you telling us that before the Bush Doctrine, our government was in shambles?
Yes, it was.
It was.
Yes, it was. Because look at Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor, we did not have the Bush Doctrine in place, and thousands of American citizens died.
Okay. Next question: are other countries entitled to preemptively strike against countries they view as threats?
No, they are not, because they're not.
So what makes the U.S. Sorry, were you finished?
Go ahead.
What makes the U.S. different?
What makes the U.S. different is, like I said in the first part, there's 5 principles. And now the 5th principle of the preemptive strike is that America has this Bush Doctrine is very aggressive. Being very aggressive, America realizes that it is the leader of the global network, which means that we take the responsibility to protect the world from this threat of terrorism.
Are you finished?
Yes, I am.
That exceeds our time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I would like to begin by reviewing Fayetteville State's position in this debate. First, my partner mentioned that we are currently spending $6 billion a month in Iraq, which Vorhees College did not contest. My partner also mentioned that we have lost 4,213 soldiers since this war began in 2003, which Vorhees College did not contest. We also mentioned that Iraq has lost at least 151,000 civilians since the war began, which Vorhees College did not contest. And lastly, my partner mentioned a loss of credibility with the international community, which Vorhees College did not contest. All of these are very real costs that you can concretely associate with the Bush Doctrine. In the last speech, we heard a lot of scare tactics. Vorhees College wanted to make you feel the way we felt when we were attacked at September 11th, scared. This is how many of the Bush policies were passed in a time of fear. I want to remind everyone that Al-Qaeda, who attacked us on September 11th, 2001, is not Iraq. The war in Iraq began in 2003. Now I'd like to go ahead and respond to some of Vorhees College's points. Cameron mentioned that the Bush Doctrine keeps us safe. Really, it has increased global terror. According to data from the RAND Corporation, the global rate of terrorism has increased almost 5-fold during Bush's presidency. That comes out to 22,000 people killed in 2007 around the world. This has also emboldened major threats, including North Korea, Iran, and Syria. They see our failure in Iraq and our struggle in Afghanistan and are able to wonder if the United States can answer those nuclear threats. Also, by choosing to attack a country that did not have nuclear weapons, rather than deterring other countries, we have encouraged them to speed up the process of procuring weapons. They want to feel safe, and they think we may come after them next. So they have instead continued to enrich uranium. And also, our loss of credibility in the international community has given them more confidence that we will not have people standing behind us, other nations standing behind us. It has been confirmed just a couple of days ago that North Korea has enriched plutonium to weapons grade. The threat is real. Vorhees College offered examples of increased intelligence that has helped prevent attacks. Increased intelligence is not exclusive to the Bush Doctrine. The Bush Doctrine is a non-binding strategy. And so removing the Bush Doctrine does not take away any power from President-elect Obama. He can choose to attack imminent threats, but it does not have to be his go-to policy. In fact, every president has traditionally made their own national security strategy, and we have no reason to believe that President-elect Obama would choose to do any differently. The second part of the Bush Doctrine has to do with democracy promotion. And we agree that democracy is great, but we have seen that democracy promotion for countries that are not ready has had many negative effects. One situation is Georgia. Georgia chose to move away from Russia and become a democracy, and the United States cheered them on. But when they were attacked by Russia, the United States condemned the attacks and offered humanitarian aid, but little else. So we are not supporting the fledgling democracies that we are promoting. Also, we are seeing that terrorists are becoming elected in these democracies. One example is Hamas in Palestine, and another is Hezbollah in Lebanon. Not only is this dangerous for those citizens, but we do not want terrorists to have official control of military assets. I would like to remind everyone that democracy is a government by the people, exercised either directly or through elected representatives. Another problem with democracy promotion is that we are pushing one kind of democracy, ours. According to the National Security Strategy of 2006, the Bush administration defines an effective democracy as one that includes a market economy, freedom of speech, things that we find in our Constitution. If democracies are governments by the people, then the people of those cultures should be deciding how their governments are run. Cameron mentioned that the main objective of the Bush Doctrine has been reached. This comment is reminiscent of President Bush's mission accomplished, which ended up being a tragic and costly miscalculation. On Vorhees College's argument regarding African slave trade. First, a more accurate analogy would be a comparison of the ideology of the slave trade and that of the Bush Doctrine. Both ideologies contend that one group has domain over the world and the right to decide the futures of citizens from other continents. And secondly, on this day, when rightfully so, Vorhees College suggests that we should honor Black history, I believe it would be more appropriate to honor the teachings of nonviolence in dealing with threats preached by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and other civil rights leaders. This could be accomplished by putting aside a doctrine of aggression in favor of nonviolent diplomatic methods as the primary option. Thank you.
In your speech, you suggested that the president of the United States has lost his legitimacy in front of his nation and internationally. In light of that, is the president's popularity more important than the nation's security?
Absolutely not.
Okay. If it's not, how do you propose he promotes the nation's security if you're saying that it's more important that other nations approve of our actions?
The United States is only one part of the world, and we have seen through our dealings in Iraq that we cannot go it alone. We need the help of the international community to deal with major threats.
But what about that instance when the global community does not take any action in front of the grave danger of global terrorism?
There were no nuclear weapons in Iraq.
True. That was a failure of our intelligence system, which was renovated after Iraq discovered that there was no nuclear weapons. However, is that an indication of the Bush Doctrine's failure, or is that an indication of the failure of our intelligence agencies?
It has been seen through the National Security Archives that President Bush knew that there were no weapons of mass destruction at the time and went on to promote it anyway.
Are you suggesting that President Bush ignored his oath in front of his people by lying?
Yes.
Yes. Yes. Yes. Yes.
Okay, question. Okay. So, should President-elect Barack Obama abandon a doctrine that has kept us safe for 7 years?
I don't believe it has kept us safe because we are more susceptible to the
But
nuclear
have we
threats
had a
of
terrorist
North
attack?
Korea,
Have we had a terrorist
Iraq,
attack since
and
9/11?
Syria.
Have we been attacked on our homeland since 9/11? A successful attack, might I add? No,
Not
we have
yet.
not. I answered.
Not yet.
Next question.
Are we all set? Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I do solemnly swear to faithfully execute the office of the President of the United States, and I will do the best of my ability to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. Ladies and gentlemen, these are the words that you will hear on tomorrow from President-elect Barack Obama, and this is what Vorhees College is asking you to agree with. We must keep the Bush Doctrine because, number one, the Bush Doctrine has fulfilled its purpose for the past 7 years, and President-elect Barack Obama has yet to propose an alternate plan that can protect American soil. Number two, the Bush Doctrine is helping the United Nations evolve with the world and its dangers. And number three, the Bush Doctrine advocates the promotion of democracy, which provides the greater good for the greater number of people. It is not a matter of instilling fear in our enemies. This is a matter of our president's obligation and solemn promise to protect the livelihoods of our U.S. citizens. Therefore, in this debate, it is the contention of the Vorhees College students, an institution that President-elect Barack Obama should keep the Bush Doctrine as a benefit to U.S. national security and global security as a whole. Contrary to popular belief, the Bush Doctrine is nothing new. It was used under the term reprisal by the British forces in Yemen in 1964, in 1967 by the Israel Defense Forces in Yemen, in 1985 by the U.S. air raid in Tunis, in 1988 in the Gulf War, and it was revived in 2003 in response to the catastrophic events of 9/11. You see, preemptive strike is granted by the right to self-defense that Article 51 under Chapter 7 of the UN Security Council provides for. Under international customary law, the right to self-defense involves an armed attack that has already begun. When the planes crashed into the Twin Towers under the control of terrorists, both the world and the United States were under attack. The purpose of the Bush Doctrine is to tackle this new threat of terrorism with a new strategy and reconstruct those nations who suffered from it. It seeks to, and I quote, deny terrorists what they need to survive: safe haven, financial support, and the support and protection that certain nation-states have historically given them. End of quote. Countries such as Afghanistan, Egypt, Indonesia, Israel, Morocco, Pakistan, Great Britain, and recently Iraq are only a few of the victims of this new threat. Terrorism, unlike preemptive strike, does not make sense. It is not simply the result of hostility towards the terrorist nation. Preemptive strike is a logical precaution that the United States has chosen in order to prevent a recurrence of the catastrophic events of 9/11. The Bush Doctrine proposes several methods to the process of countering transnational terrorism. One, prevent terrorist attacks from occurring before they materialize. Deny weapons of mass destruction to rogue states and their terrorist allies who would use them without hesitation. Deny terrorist groups the support and sanctuary of rogue states. Deny terrorists the control of any nation that they would use as a base or launching pad for terror. Such are the provisions of the 2006 United States foreign policy. This policy has kept the United States safe for the past 7 years, and it should not be dismissed because it is currently the only existing national defense strategy against the new threat of terrorism. A new threat requires new measures, new approaches, and new technology. With the development of biological, chemical, and nuclear weapons, the means of destruction are evolving, and consequently, the means to protect against such dangers must evolve. In the same way, terrorism is a new threat and a weapon of destruction, possibly mass destruction, if nothing is done to bring it to an end. For far too long, we have ignored the magnitude of this threat, and it all became crystal clear on September 11th, 2001. The Bush Doctrine proposes a method that does not need to involve military force, but in light of the devastating consequences of weapons of mass destruction and terrorism, which Iraq has been a perpetuator of for the past decade, one cannot afford to stand idly and watch as grave dangers materialize. One cannot fight fanaticism with reason. It just doesn't work. How can one explain to the Muslim radical that the sole reason for his struggle is immoral and unjust? Domestically, a preemptive attack can also prevent devastating damages such as the 9/11. According to the Center for Contemporary Conflict, the aftermath of the 9/11 events read $27.2 billion in direct business costs, as well as $500 billion in gross domestic product. Preemptive measures can also prevent damages of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki magnitude. I believe we all know what those names mean. In addition, the Bush Doctrine should not be dismissed because it is helping the United Nations advance with the world and its dangers. The United States of America is not trying to defy the UN's authority, but it is attempting to ensure that it reflects today's geopolitical realities and it is not shackled by obsolete structures. The United States is only trying to ensure that the UN's peacekeeping operations are effective and successful in light of this new threat of global terrorism. The Bush Doctrine is meant to create new international law, that of anticipatory self-defense, and this law keeps up with the world and its dangers, as well as the new threats to peace. Thus, the conditions for invoking the right to self-defense have to be reinterpreted so as to take into account these new grave threats. Those who oppose this approach ought to consider the questions that Professor Dietrich Murswig at the Albert Ludwig Institute of Public Law in Germany poses. Should international law not adapt to the capabilities of today's adversaries, or should it fail vis-à-vis these new challenges? With this being said, the Bush Doctrine should not be dismissed because it advocates the promotion of democracy, which provides the greater good for the greater number of people. Domestically, a democracy reconciles and respects the voices of the people and seeks to create fair and equitable treatment of its citizens at all social and political strata. Internationally, a democracy will not only receive more help and support from its homologous nations, but it would also teach that helping others embrace a free society is a social responsibility that successful nations have towards those less fortunate. The Bush Doctrine is giving a new meaning to humanitarian action, which is sadly overshadowed by remarks of hypocritical nature due to its economic and political ranking. Considering the overwhelming threat and historical damages of terrorism, according to Jeremy Bentham's utilitarian theory, a fundamental principle of democracy, the greatest happiness and good of all those whose interest is in question is the right and proper and the only right and proper thing to do. Therefore, we propose that the Bush Doctrine be kept as a benefit to the U.S. national security and global security as a whole. In the spirit of democracy, the voices of the masses who demand the return of the troops should be heard, and therefore we propose that the troops be retrieved from Iraq with minimal intervention squads to remain to facilitate the transition to democracy that has already begun in Iraq. We cannot put Iraq on the kayak of democracy and not give him a paddle or a push. Lastly, to President-elect Barack Obama and to the whole international community, we offer a principle of logic that has proven its validity time and time again. It is better to prevent than to treat. President-elect Barack Obama should not dismiss the Bush Doctrine because the occurrence of major terrorist attacks has been close to zero since the doctrine has been implemented. Although this doctrine has cost us more than expected, the contention of Vorhees College tonight is that President-elect Barack Obama should not put a price tag on the American citizen's life. Thank you.
Okay. At one point, you discussed how the Bush Doctrine does not have to be military force. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. Since the first tenet of the Bush Doctrine is preemptive war, can you explain the concept of non-military war?
Military force is not the main objective of preemptive strike. The objective is to be prepared to use it in order to prevent an imminent attack. With the principle of preemption, the main objective is not to swing at the invisible force, but it is ensuring that sufficient information is gathered before action is being taken, and that only then is military action considered necessary. With that being said, a non-military war is a war where non-military or diplomatic action is taken as a main course of action under the principle that different situations require different measures that Fayetteville State advocated in their speech.
Does the Bush Doctrine...
I'm not done.
But I asked the questions.
I'm not done answering
Okay,
your
go ahead
question.
and continue. I'm sorry.
Fayetteville State advocated that different situations ask for different measures. Therefore, a non-military war could be possible even under the policy of preemptive strike, depending on the threat and situation in question.
Okay, one more question. Can President-elect Obama go after an imminent threat without the Bush Doctrine?
Yes. The answer to your question is yes, because the Bush Doctrine or any doctrine provides guidelines, strategy, and the protocol that presidents and countries are required to respect in front of the global community. Without those strategies and guidelines, the Bush Doctrine would be helpless, and And preemptive strike would not have any sense. We would be using our resources in vain without a plan of attack, without a plan of protection, and without a budget.
So you're saying we don't need the Bush Doctrine to stay safe in the United States?
No, that is not what I am saying. What I am saying is that the Bush Doctrine is necessary for those guidelines to be in place to protect our nation's security.
Thank you. I would like to begin by mentioning that Vorhees College has not contested anything my partner said in her first speech, and they have also not addressed several things that I mentioned in my speech, specifically that the U.S. failures in Iraq have emboldened our enemies. Vorhees College did not contest that terrorists have been elected as a result of democracy promotion. Vorhees College did not contest, and that increased security intelligence, which is necessary to keep us safe, is not exclusive to the Bush Doctrine. Vorhees College did not contest. These all should be considered undisputed negative impacts of the Bush Doctrine. Now I would like to go ahead and address some of the things that Vorhees College said. She mentioned that promoting democracy provides for fair and equitable treatment of citizens, the greater good. It's hard for me to imagine that the United States is in a position to talk about fair treatment when we've been involved in Abu Ghraib and escaping the Geneva Convention and finding loopholes so that we can be involved in torture. Also, according to Farhat Prasani, we are 58 times, as an Iraqi citizen, you are 58 times more likely to be killed now than you were under Saddam. Fair and equitable treatment. She mentioned that these new threats need new methods, but the methods laid out in the Bush Doctrine are actually very limiting. For one, they de-emphasize soft power, which is diplomacy or economic sanctions. They make a military attack our go-to strategy. Also, it reduces the effectiveness of our hard power. If our troops are stretched out too thin in Iraq and in Afghanistan, we can't be ready for those nuclear attacks of Iran, Syria, and North Korea. I believe that Secretary of State-elect Hillary Clinton said it best when she said, "We must use what has been called smart power, deploying the full range of tools at our disposal, diplomatic, economic, military, political, legal, and cultural, picking the right tool or combination of tools for each situation." Vorhees College also mentioned that the Bush Doctrine is assisting in UN evolution. Really, the United States ignored UN regulations by going to war with Iraq in 2003. And has since then discredited the UN. According to Stephen Schlesinger, an adjunct fellow at the Century Foundation, administration officials have openly disparaged the UN and condoned anti-UN statements made by others. They want to show that the United States is superior, a special nation with a unique voice which should not be subject to global dictates. Victorita also mentioned that we should bring the troops home but keep the doctrine. At this point in time, bringing the troops home until their nation is stabilized would destroy their democracy, not providing them with the support that they need. And lastly, she mentioned that it is better to prevent than it is to treat. The type of prevention laid out in the Bush Doctrine is similar to preventing teen pregnancy by sterilization. It's not prevention. It's aggressive treatment. The true treatment, or the true prevention, is diplomacy. We've heard a lot of speeches today, and I want to lay this out as clearly as possible. Imagine that my arms are scales, and on this side are the negative reasons of the Bush Doctrine. Okay, so the loss of American lives, the loss of Iraqi lives, the loss of money, the loss of credibility, our inability to deal with future threats. And on the positive side, nothing. This is why President-elect Obama's first official action as president should be to publicly declare his abandonment of the Bush Doctrine. Thank you.
aggressive treatment in Iraq, wasn't the 9/11 catastrophe an aggressive tactic of terrorism? Will they respond if we knock on their door and say, will you please stop bombing my people? I believe not. When aggression is used against a person who is guided by reason and free will, such as America, America may not be an individual, but nevertheless, it is an entity. Like I mentioned in my speech, you cannot fight fanaticism or aggressiveness with reason or peacefulness. How can the fanatic radical or the Muslim radical understand that you are killing my people? Will that appeal to them? The answer to that question is rather evident. You see, history teaches us that making a change like the one that President-elect Barack Obama advocated in his speech takes time and many sacrifices. The Bush Doctrine has not only fulfilled its purpose on the war on terror, since we have not had a major successful attack on the United States for the past 7 years, but it proposed a change that the world was not ready for, nor was willing to embrace. An aggressive stance against terrorism, an aggressive stance that no other country or economic power has dared to take. Who are we to stand and let Iraqis be terrorized, or any other nation be terrorized by their own dictators, when the United Nations advocates a fair treatment of any citizens of any nation? You see, President-elect Barack Obama should not dismiss this premise on the sole reason of it being too costly. How can we put a price on existence? Consider the costs of nuclear annihilation as opposed to the casualties and the brain damages that my opposition brought into question. There isn't a comparison. There isn't a comparison between brain damages and no life on the United States continent. How can we propose to our president not to faithfully execute his oath as the United States president, when that damaged his own credibility in front of the nation, the same credibility that was brought as an argument to releasing the Bush Doctrine? Isn't that a little bit of hypocrisy from us? We say we're losing credibility, but we're asking our president to lose its credibility by refusing to protect the nation it's supposed to govern over? Somewhere in the middle, it doesn't make sense. Sure, we have lost a lot of men in this crusade against terrorism, but how many have we saved from the danger of nuclear annihilation? Just because our intelligence told us wrong that there were no nuclear weapons in Iraq doesn't mean they don't exist. Saddam Hussein violated 16 United Nations Security Council resolutions in regards to giving access to its nuclear arsenal for the past 12 years. Just because we haven't found it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. You see, ladies and gentlemen, why are we supposed to propose to President-elect Barack Obama to give up national security to a world that has already accepted terrorism as a reality of the time and not as an urgent matter of life and death? I'm telling you, if we don't stand for something, we will fall for anything. Thank you very much.
Real quick, ladies and gentlemen, if I could just have just a couple of minutes. First, I'd like to ask you to give your appreciation, show your appreciation to Angela Fowler, Genesee Bassert, Mindy Laney, and Stephanie Baker, our interpreters today. The next thing I'd like for you to just bear with me everyone that stood on this stage, coaches and debaters, come up quick. Let's go, let's go, let's go, let's go. You two, and you two. In front. Come on front. On sides, yeah. Move to the middle.